Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to have a great conversation related to Epic on Azure and kind of the value propositions and why there's such interest in the market right now related to using public cloud like Azure as part of the Epic hosting strategy. I'm joined today by Nick. Let's do just a round of introductions. Nick, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Curtis. So, hi everyone. I'm Nick Raker. I'm from Microsoft. I am an Epic Global Black Belt. My role at Microsoft is to support the seller community at Microsoft and the clients in regard to any of their Epic on Azure deployments. I support the whole Azure stack all up, as well as in my role I support AVD for Epic as well. And yeah, I'm here joined by my buddy Curtis. He's really my good buddy. I'm not his. Optimum is one of our strongest partners at Microsoft and one of our Epic on Azure preferred partners. We work, we do great work with Curtis and his team. I don't even know exactly how many clients that we worked on across the spectrum so far, but it's quite a few, and we continue to grow that number. So, Curtis, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And this will be a fireside chat type of conversation. So we'll try to keep it light and fun and friendly. So just as a means of introduction, so I'm Curtis Hendrick. I'm the Senior Vice President of Cloud Services at Optimum Healthcare IT, and actually come from the provider side of the organization. So I've been in healthcare organizations, everything from the bottom at the starting at the help desk to all the way to CTO and running healthcare IT organizations. So my passion is in helping organizations figure out how to get value out of public cloud. And it's something that I've been putting a lot of energy and effort into helping a number of our customers do that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right. So our first question, which is, I think where we have to start, which is the why, right? Why Epic on Azure? Why is this something that organizations are adopting? Why is this something that there's a ton of interest in right now? And we've really distilled it down to four main categories. So we're going to hit on things that I think matter very much to organizations. So obviously, starting with cost, we are seeing organizations struggle with payer mixes and with reimbursements, and cost has always been something that's top of mind for organizations. So we're going to talk about how this can impact cost. We're going to talk about resiliency. Obviously, if you're running Epic, if this is your crown jewels, it has to be working and it has to be resilient. It has to be available for your customers. And so we're going to talk about how Epic on Azure can impact resiliency, as well as agility. As organizations are being asked to be able to move faster and quicker and being asked to do more, agility is a huge aspect that we think Epic has an impact on, or Epic on Azure has an impact on. And then elasticity. Obviously, cloud's impact on elasticity is something that is going to have an impact with how you host these things. So let's dive in. All right, starting with cost, the first most important pillar, I think, or one of the most impactful pillars, consumption-based costs. So, the idea here that an organization is now paying for what they're using rather than buying these capital assets that depreciate over a period of time. And we end up, being fixed with what we can physically have in our data centers versus just this consumption-based model. Nick, how are you seeing organizations, reduce costs or save money as it pertains to just, having the subscription or consumption-based costing?
Well, that's a great question, Curtis. Across a lot of clients that I talk with, they're doing several things. I mean, certain clients for, obviously alt production, don't leverage anything more than a particular percentage for pilot light. That's one way. Ultimately, too, clients will, only keep up a certain amount of servers for when it comes to their alternate production, training, build environments. Maybe throughout the month, they may spin them down for a certain percentage of time. But their ability to, access those servers on demand is still there, and they have the availability when needed.
Excellent. Yeah, I think one of the stats we saw in some of our analysis was in your alt production, just by server count alone, your presentation and your web server tier, they can make up 50 to 80+% of the count of servers that are running within your alt production or DR environment. And when you can spin that down to 10 or 15 or 20% just to be a pilot light ready to be scaled up and activated when need be, you can save a lot of money in that way, right? Where right now in data centers, they've got to have that gear ready, sitting there not being used as we wait for it, right? And same thing with training and things like that, right? Where they've got a big upgrade or they've got a new acquisition in which they've got to train a lot of people, and scaling that paying for what they need and then turning it off. We're seeing that definitely impact organizations from a cost perspective.
It definitely
Set,
makes more sense. And then on
yeah.
top of it, the licensing aspect as well
Oh
is
yeah.
tied into the consumption with this. So there's a double cost that you're saving there. The
Yeah.
money is just continues to be built up over time. So
Great point. Great point. So I refer to this one as auto scale ish. This is not traditional or auto scaling as we typically think of. But what this is that within the cloud. So when you're well, first of all, when you're on prem, the infrastructure that you buy that you've provisioned for this use, you just leave it running all the time because you've already bought it. There's no downside in leaving it running and having it being available. But in the cloud, when you can start better matching your usage to the circumstances that for the cost of those, you have the ability to start scaling your environments up and down. Now, right now, we don't have anything working from like a load perspective where it's like higher loaded hits, but we do know that load typically follows calendar and hourly schedules related to weekends or holidays, especially for ambulatory clinics, organizations that are more 9 to 5. And so there is the ability within cloud for you to kind of scale parts of those environments up and down to be able to kind of optimize your costs related to that. And that's something even in the production state of the environments, there's the ability to do that, right? We talked about training as well and kind of scaling training environments up and down. It's not, I want to be clear, it's not perfectly auto scale like we think of traditionally, but it is have the ability for automation to bring your environment up and down to try to scale best to your workloads. And that's been saving organizations costs as well. Uh, so lastly on this list, compute advancements. So how do new chipsets or new instance types or new advancements in compute impact people's cost?
well, from the Microsoft perspective, the way that they impact costs realistically is generally we like to see the cost go down as we see and new chips come out. The workloads are able to be, processed much more efficiently. We like to see the cost go down as those new chips come on board, and we encourage clients to upgrade, obviously, when they become available. And we, in all cases, across the board, I believe we are able to upgrade them without cost to the client. In those few instances where that might not be an appropriate statement would be in private preview SKUs, where they're still new and they're not necessarily released 100%. So that's where I was referencing that there.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one thing that we've seen as well, and there's some stories of this from customers related to, density that they could maybe see on certain instance types. So when new compute comes out that's more efficient, there is the opportunity to evaluate similar, do you have the right level of density? Can you handle more concurrent users? Can you handle more sessions on a certain instance type as new ones come out? And these are things that you don't even know when you start this journey that there are savings opportunities down the road as new instance types and new compute configurations and performance improves of being able to shrink or decrease the volume of servers you have by improving density and things like that. And so that's one of the nice kind of curveball opportunities that comes down from a cost perspective that you can't even calculate up front because you don't know what instance types are going to happen 2 to 3 years from now, right? And how those are going to advance in there. Um,
Absolutely.
Great point. I know that cost is a huge component of what organizations are interested in, but I think also organizations want to know that if they're going to move their crown jewels to another place, some data center that's not theirs, how can they trust it, right? And so resiliency has to be number 2 on the list. This has to be something that organizations have to not only trust that there's resiliency here and that they can have high availability with their environment, but there's aspects of cloud that I think organizations don't necessarily always consider as they're looking at how they host Epic traditionally versus how we'd host it in the cloud. And the first one I will highlight is multiple availability zones architectures. That's not something we traditionally have on-prem. How are you seeing that kind of impact the resiliency of the Epic hosting?
Well, I mean, from the perspective of deploying Epic on Azure customers, I mean, they get the redundancy right across multiple AZs. Plus, they have that ability to spread out, those workloads like across the web server components that get spread out across 3 AZs as opposed to being in one primary data center, and that gives you the essentially added redundancy or knowledge therefore that your workloads will be protected because they're within separate data centers that have separate power grids and separate aspects of the environment that are going to make sure they stay online and don't have to actually or won't go down in any case.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because if we think about most healthcare provider organizations, when they have a second or maybe third data center, they're usually putting them pretty geographically diverse. Situations where they don't have that low latency in which they can spread Citrix or a web server tier or something like that interconnect across multiple availability zones to have that diversity and redundancy between them, right? That's not a typical architecture that we're seeing within most healthcare organizations. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and further than that, though, you have other things like load balancing, like we talked about before, a little bit, and then data replication across those AZs, like I had mentioned a little bit, and that can work really well, especially if there's any AZ failure, just for added
yeah,
resiliency.
I mean, you could lose an entire availability zone and you could still maintain your Epic environment, right? Which is
Exactly.
something that's not typical within organizations, and that's like in an active state, right? Not even just like failing over a DR, but it's hey, we lost these web servers and things like that, but we can spin the rest up in the other availability zones.
Oh
But
yeah.
you maintain the survival of that. Now let's get into multi-region as well. So we always hear about there's regions all over the United States, and there's different regions you can host your environment out of. How is that providing more resiliency for healthcare organizations?
So from a geo redundancy perspective, you're basically deploying your data centers now in a completely different geolocation within the United States. So adding even more protection outside of what we're already getting from a redundancy perspective within AZs, adding even more going further to the regions. It makes it that your basically ability to stay up in times of disaster is that much higher, because if something happens in the primary location, by policy, you can trigger traffic to be relocated immediately to the disaster recovery area, and you can start spinning up then your actual pilot light servers for your presentation layer, and get those online so your organization can stay up and operate in times of crisis.
And where I think I've seen this probably be most impactful is, kind of the mid-size healthcare organizations who, for them, they maybe have a data center that they trust, but their secondary data center is somewhat of a, maybe it's a colo someplace and it's not fully built out and they don't have the full capacity there where, you get to take advantage of Microsoft's capacity across the United States, right? So having the ability to have a geographically dispersed region where you can put your disaster recovery and you have all the capacity you could ever want there. That's certainly something that is a value proposition to cloud that we just aren't able to achieve in most mid-sized healthcare organizations. Yeah, it's a great call out. And the other thing that I
Just
like to
to
yeah, go ahead, hit
Go
on it
ahead.
again, dude. Let's
I
go.
was going to say, just to add to that, because we're talking so much about, ransomware and resiliency. We also have the added benefit of the data. We can, ensure data sovereignty, within different regions, and then, further that, we can ensure too that security standards are met across the two, and we keep things as tight as possible to avoid as many possible issues as we may run into in this crazy world with ransomware running rampant, all over the place.
Yeah, even from a networking perspective, just the ability for the routing and backpinning of traffic from different availabilities or different regions, there's a lot of value there as well. So I mean, there's
Great call.
this is a unique attribute of cloud that you're really not getting in any other hosting type of configuration. And the other thing I like to call out too is someone that was responsible for data centers in the past. You typically at a healthcare organization can afford to have an N+1, N+2 type configurations from a data center where you're taking advantage of not only multiple data centers with and multiple availability zones within a region, but each of those data centers also has higher resiliency from an environmentals and a power and cooling and things like that that you could really achieve on-prem, right? It's cost prohibitive for you to do that, or maybe you are gonna go to a colo where you're paying a lot of money for those types of things. Those are all part of the architecture here within the cloud. So it's certainly something that is a differentiator from your other hosting opportunities here. And I think from a resiliency standpoint, we can't go any further without bringing up what was previously referred to as cloud read only, but is now referred to as the isolated recovery environment or IRE. Tell me how this is helping organizations improve resiliency.
So, Curtis, that's an interesting question. I'm getting a lot of interest from the client, the Epic client world in regard to cloud read only. It will allow clients that in an event of a ransomware attack that they have an ability to stay up and access real-time patient data for a window of time, and allow them to still ensure that they have not only that continuous access to the data, but they're also then still reducing some cost in that front. And it's, they still have levels of enhanced security by doing this, so therefore they can actually protect and hopefully come back and restore from that particular disaster in that context. The way that a lot of clients are saving money is this environment is isolated, it's set up, it's deployed, it's relatively bare bones when it comes to Epic for BCA deployment. You essentially are the only real major moving part until traffic is flipped on. The switch is turned on to this particular environment is the continuous iris mirroring that'll happen in the background between the ODB of your production environment to the ODB for the CRO environment, or IRE, excuse me.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm still getting used to the new nomenclature as well too. This was just released recently as far as their plans forward or Epic's plans forward on IRE. Which the other thing you brought up money briefly, and I've seen some organizations actually use the instantiation of this environment as an opportunity to try to renegotiate their premiums for cybersecurity as well. So there's opportunities there as organizations. Not only does it truly improve resiliency, but it also from an insurance perspective, they observe that as something that's also improving resiliency that, is really a unique thing to cloud. Again, it's very difficult to stand up a truly isolated air-gapped environment on-prem, right? That's not
Yeah.
something we typically are able to easily do.
Yeah, and
And
with this new Epic technology for safe harbor, it will be some level of read-write capable, right? I don't have much more information I can provide than that, but
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely seems to be an area that not only is the industry in need of, but it's something that Epic seems to be continuing to invest in as well. And so this is another way that, Epic running Epic on Azure can improve resiliency for organizations. All right, let's continue. Agility, moving quickly, the ability to validate and move things at a rapid pace here. So rapid validation. This is something that we've seen our customers, kind of eye-opening moments take place for them where, they were used to before new instance or new chipset comes out, new storage comes out, some new technology comes out. It's getting a demo unit maybe from the vendor. Maybe it's ordering an early stage device to be able to put in your data center and test it. Well, that's not really the case anymore. Even like certain theories where people said, well, could we host it this way? What if we moved presentation over here and we had this way for different reasons? They're able to say, why don't we just test it? Let's spin it up. Let's test it. Let's validate it. If it works, great. We'll, put some compute plans around it or put some reserved instances around it. But if it doesn't work, then we just turn it off, right? And so this is something that the mindset related to agility starts to change within organizations as they start moving Epic and other workloads, right, to the cloud. Now they can rapidly validate different theories and things that they want to test and things like that. We've got customers who have, moved Citrix in different circumstances, whether it be on-prem or back to the cloud or things like that, for ways of capitalizing things or supporting growth that they would have never had that opportunity before, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, it's completely new. All right, speed to value. How are organizations benefiting when it comes to like speed to value and how they're getting value from being running in Azure?
Um, you know, I've seen and heard from clients they're getting more and more value because they can do more rapid refresh cycles, for instance. They can do faster and more efficient upgrades, and basically deploy it on the newest technology using Azure.
Well, I think one of my favorite stories on this was, when we look at the performance you get out of System Pulse, and you look at response rates, and you look at the variations, because most organizations, they don't do like every 4 years, they refresh their entire presentation tier. They do like quarters at a time. And so people have varying response times and varying levels of performance based upon what server they got landed on, right? Because there's 4 years of generations of different servers that are supporting the totality of the environment. Well, now we have the ability to move everybody to the latest one, right?
Sure.
So now there's the consistency of performance, as well as so whenever new opportunity comes out, we can be more agile and move much more quickly in terms of getting value of these new things that are coming out. So that's certainly
Absolutely.
been an area that we've been seeing some value in as well. And kind of along those same lines, decreasing planning cycles. I don't know about you, but when I was responsible for an environment, I spent a lot of time every year looking at what was our run rate, what was our growth rate, how did we figure out to make sure that we had the right amount of capacity? How do we make sure that we were always planning and going through those cycles of procurement and making sure that we got everything in and then racked and then we did the data transfer to the new thing. All of the work that went into maintaining an on-prem environment, now you don't need to do those things, right? I mean, you still plan from a costing model perspective, but you don't need to do all the other activities related to making sure that you order it at the right time and that you get it lined up with your capital purchases and all these things. And that's an area that we've seen organizations not only just save mental cycles in, but allow them to be more agile, allow them to respond to these circumstances that come up a lot faster.
Well, I
Um,
mean, yeah, Curtis,
Go ahead.
in the past, it took you what, 2 to 5 years you'd have to plan ahead for, right?
Yeah,
And with Azure, you could basically plan tomorrow and do
yeah.
whatever it is you come up with, right? On
the
the
nu-
fly.
the number of times I've seen people who bought hardware for an ODB server and then were 2 years into it, 3 years into it, they wanted to get 4 years into it or 5 years into it, and then they're like, well, because of upgrades, because of these things, now I have to refresh it early, so I'm gonna, have it waterfall down to lower environments and all this stuff. We don't have to play that game anymore, right?
Yep,
We
yep,
that
that's
that
right.
it's a different world that we're in when we move these things to the cloud. Yeah,
No,
great, great.
you can't do that on-prem.
Yeah, exactly. All right, elasticity. So obviously the cloud is elastic. That's one of the general value propositions of cloud. But how do we see that come into play when it comes to healthcare organizations? How, like, specifically like supporting business growth, right? How are you seeing the elasticity of cloud support business growth and provide value to healthcare organizations?
I mean, realistically, the biggest ones are the slowdown and decrease of over provisioning environments. That would be one of the primary ones, and then the secondary biggest one, and maybe this is even bigger, is the fact that the IT doesn't any longer have to say no to the business when they request something specifically of them because of hardware constraints. That's no
Mhm.
longer a thing. That's just a thing of the past. The hardware constraints are not the problem. It would literally become now resource related. So
Yeah.
the focus is just being able to get the work done. It's not around pulling and getting more hardware in place and getting it stood up in order to meet the requirements of the business.
Yeah, and I think we see this probably coming in most impactful too in our experience has been acquisitions, like mergers and acquisitions, when all of a sudden, IT sometimes isn't always at the table when these decisions are made, and we're kind of told later on down the path. And then we're told, all right, well, we got to be able to support certain amount of growth, certain amount of new user base, things like that. The ability to just scale your environment up, that's fine. With 2 clicks, I can make that happen, right? Or divestitures, when all of a sudden you're going to be losing the population of users, you have the ability to meet your growth and scale that way, which kind of brings to the next topic, right? Which is adjusting scale during technology shifts, right? Like, what's a technology shift that's happened in the last 2 years that caused organizations to have to adjust their scale? So we look at the next topic about how elasticity can deliver value when it comes to adjusting scale during technology shifts. I can think of a few that organizations have had to adjust their scale to just based upon, hyperdrive deployments. And if an organization has decided to adopt hyperdrive, or when they decided to adopt hyperdrive, they all of a sudden needed more hyperspace web servers, but they potentially need a lot less, presentation servers. And these are things that we don't necessarily know 2, 3, 4 years out, but these are things where the elasticity of the cloud can just allow us to shift up and shift down where we need to when technology changes, because we don't always know what the dependencies or what the application requirements are going to be for the technology 2, 3, 4, 5 years out when we need to be making these procurement decisions on prem, right? And so this is an area where elasticity is also providing value. Um, Also, optimizing your environment surplus. So our estimates right now from our customers have been someplace in the range of 10 to 20% in the compute realm and 20 to 40% in the storage realm of how much surplus capacity they keep at any given time to make sure that they can support the asks of the business, right? If I went to an organization today and I said, I need 30 servers, I need 2 terabytes, they probably could provision that. There's going to be a point where they couldn't provision it, but all of that gear, all of that surplus, this is all equipment and costs that you have not that you're not getting value out of, right? And so optimizing your environment so that the surplus is truly only what you need based upon your load and capacity, rather than having surplus and carrying surplus for the future. I mean, Nick, one of the things I see a lot when organizations try to do cost comparisons between cloud and on-prem is that this is a gap that's missed because they say, well, I look at this one server, this one blade, this is what it costs me to do.
Hmm.
But when you really look at what the surplus that you carry for the overall computer, overall storage, those are certainly areas that we see we see them over provisioning and not counting that cost in terms of their TCOs. They're comparing these things.
Yeah, I
Um,
totally agree with you, Curtis.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nick, for the Epic on Azure stuff. There's one more topic I definitely want to hit on because it's something you and I are both getting a lot of conversation, a lot of interest in, and that's Azure Virtual Desktop. And so let's talk briefly about kind of current drivers. What are you seeing out there in terms of why organizations are so interested on Azure Virtual Desktop?
The two main biggest drivers for me that I'm seeing are really around cost savings, obviously. So the savings that you gain from moving away from Citrix and moving to AVD, you not only save cost on the side of your Citrix licensing, but you also save costs on the side of your on the side of Microsoft, because you're no longer paying us as well as and Citrix to deploy within our environment. And then finally, too, we're also seeing interest in the context of ransomware. And I'm kind of interested in that context, Curtis. What are you guys seeing with your clients? Because I know you're actually working with quite a few AVD clients today.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, Nick, because we've seen organizations just in the last 6 to 12 months kind of move their focus beyond just trying to prevent ransomware from happening, but they're also looking at how do they recover and what technologies they need to have when a ransomware event does happen so they can recover more quickly. And
Hmm.
actually, this is AVD is one of the technologies that's been put on the top 3, 4, 5 items that they say this is a technology that can help us restore much quicker because much of that management plane and underlying infrastructure is all managed by Microsoft. And so there's only a few things that they would have to do to really recover from a ransomware event when it comes to Azure Virtual Desktop. And the other thing that I think is really interesting here is that, from our customers who have gone through ransomware events or when we come in and responded to ransomware events, a lot of times the FBI or the organizations that want to investigate it, insurance companies, they don't want you to restore the environment. They want you to keep it isolated so they can investigate it, so they can do the forensics on it. And if you do that, if you have that on-prem, you don't have a whole new set of gear for you to rebuild stuff on. Like that's the only gear you've got. And so in the cloud, it's nice because you can put that gear, you can isolate it, keep it there for the investigation, but then you can bring services back up more quickly with this. So that's been an area that I wasn't expecting, honestly, 6 months ago, but we've been seeing a lot of interest in, and AVD's really kind of come into play on that.
Great, totally.
All right, we got it. We can't talk about AVD without talking about kind of where we're going, right? Because AVD is not yet a target software for presentation of Epic, but it is, under investigation right now. What are you seeing from your perspective in terms of the future progress that's necessary to kind of advance it to be ready for prime time?
So from our end, as you stated, Microsoft, from Microsoft's end, we are in with AVD with Epic an exploratory supported kind of situation now, where our future state and our desire is to achieve a accepted platform by sometime early to mid next year. But to get there, we have a few steps to go through. We have some minor things we're working through in regard to different perennials and certain things around Twain scanners that we need to get worked out, that we are working out with multiple clients, and we expect to see some solutions and corrections where where the technology was lacking in short order. We also expect to see some additional advancement in lieu or in way of Imprivata and our integration with Imprivata very soon. In lieu of that integration taking place, we've worked with a partner, or we've worked with an additional company to kind of backfill that issue.
Mhm.
However, we're looking to correct that overall appropriately for the larger Epic on Azure ecosphere. Sorry.
Yeah, excellent. No, that makes sense. I think this is an area where I think organizations, when because it takes 6 to 12 to 18 months sometimes to fully replace a technology like this. And so, organizations are keeping a very close eye on this. I know our customers are. We're obviously working with customers that are early stages in this and are moving down this path. So I couldn't talk about Epic in the cloud without bringing up Azure Virtual Desktop. So I appreciate you giving us your insights and value on that. And with that, I just want to share, thank you everybody who joined us today and is listening to this. We appreciate, and hopefully this was valuable and interesting for you and gave you some information to be thinking about. If you have any follow-ups that you're interested in having, if you want to have a consultation or a conversation about any of these topics, we'd love to talk to you. Our website is Optimum Healthcare IT or optimumhit.com. /contact. You can reach out to us there and we can set up a time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nick, for joining me. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Curtis.
Take care, everybody. Yes.
Thanks, everybody.